put things in their containers, including my mind and body. Right now I'm just trying to put the phone in its container. There we go. Oh, it felt good to move like that. Very much so. And there is one very important thing that I didn't mention, and it's actually part of the topic of my talk today. So I am putting in the chat box the link, but I don't know if that one really goes directly there. So I'm just going to put in the portlandinsight.org link for the ability to, as you know, the teachings are priceless. And we support each other and support the teachings of the Dhamma, and there is an opportunity always to share your generosity, both in time and volunteering and giving yourself the opportunity to practice and providing continuation of the teachings. So it's in the chat box now. Many of you hear me say this. I'm always wondering what I'm going to talk about. And it's down to the wire. I try to equate the Dharma with personal experiences. And last week on Monday morning, you heard me reference about taking refuge in the Buddha, taking refuge in the possibility of enlightenment, of freedom. And as a response to taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, I told you about my bout with anger and fear and taking refuge in that safety. To meet the noisy next door neighbor in my hotel room in Los Angeles, who then went from being my difficult person to my neutral person. And so this week, I think it was spawned partly from what Robert talked about last week, because I know some people only come once a week. They don't come every morning. They come once a week only on Sundays. And I think that that's a useful time to visit some of the foundational practices in Buddhism. And so this week's talk is a little bit more of a wisdom talk that involves generosity and harmonious living and meditation. And it's what are called the 3 pillars of the Dhamma. And investigating this, I also have found that there's something deeper that's revealed. Dana, Sila, and Bhavana, which is generosity, harmonious living, and meditation, they are for our flow of life, our samsara, our life consciousness. And there are also 3 other pillars that are Sila, Samadhi, which is concentration, meditative absorption, and Panya, which is wisdom, for reaching complete freedom from suffering, or it's also referred to as Nibbana in Pali, or Nirvana in Hindi, I believe. So, and you might notice we mention this, sometimes people say, well, what is the threefold bliss? Because that's talked about when we chant the sharing of the merit sometimes at the end of sitting. And so the threefold bliss is that second set of 3 of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. And so whether a person is a monastic person or a lay person, we each have the ability to practice and develop in this life, whether we feel complete liberation or peace and happiness in this moment. The doors are open for us and the teachings are there. Trina, can you hear me? Okay, good. So I'm going to focus on the first 3 because they're easily developed and practiced in our daily flow of life. They were taught by the Buddha in order, or so it was handed down, of generosity first, And that was understood because as lay people and monastics had to interact with each other, each were dependent on generosity, of the giving of the teachings, the giving of alms and support. And then there's Sila, which is morality. It's a way to have peacefulness in the community and reciprocity between monastics and lay people. And then lastly, after developing the foundation of a wholesome life, the practices of meditation were taught. So they were given in hundreds of different ways, the teachings of the Buddha, depending on the temperament of the person or the people that he was talking with. And it was brought to the West sort of in the reverse order. As Western seekers, they went out to Burma and Thailand and India, and they wanted to learn how to meditate, and they brought it back as teachings of meditation. And included then were practices of Sila, the 5 precepts, and then the practice of generosity over the last maybe 10 years has been understood of its importance. So I'm actually going to address these backwards because the practice of dana, of generosity, can lead us to complete freedom. However, so does mindfulness, and so do the practices of Sila. But I'm going to kind of work backwards because this is where I'm relating it to my daily life, believe it or not. I've been doing a 3-day retreat that happened yesterday, Friday, and it's happening today, now, and then later on. And it's a retreat with Angela Kyoto Williams. I always like attending women teachers and supporting their teachings. And those of you who know Angela Kyoto Williams, she's an author and an activist. She's a Zen priest and the founder of an organization called Transformative Change. And it centers on the link between inner work and wholeness and social transformation. And I posted last week in the email listserv an interview that Tammy, what's her name? Tammy Simon did with her on Sounds True, called Belonging, From Fear to Freedom, A Path to True Community. And so if you get a chance to look back through, you might like listening to that podcast. She also has, her recent book is called Radical Dharma. So the teachings of following the Eightfold Path, which I won't go into today because I want to stay on point with the 3 pillars of the Dharma, but in the formal practice of sitting on our cushion, walking, or whatever is comfortable for us, I find it helpful to challenge the idea that there is something to do. There's so much implicit and explicit messaging in our society that we should always be doing something, that we transfer that into our meditation practice. Like, we should be doing something, we should always be positive and productive, but sometimes it's okay to just be where we are. We don't always need to be doing something. And meditation can be a great aid for this. It helps us slow down, drop into acceptance of what's present. And it also paves the way for greater patience and resilience, the ability to not get stuck in the vortex of despair. Sometimes this is enough and it feels good and wise just to do nothing, to just be present with what's here. And sometimes it's clear that we might be avoiding something or falling too far inward or getting a little too spaced out. So we can use other practices that were taught for meditation. The practices of the paramis, you've heard me speak of them before, which I brought up in today's sitting, of effort and energy. And we can use investigation with mindfulness and awareness to see clearly what's happening in a neutral way. Sometimes in sitting and there's pain in the body or sensations that are repeating in the mind, I like this quote about motivation. Motivation happens when the pain of not doing something becomes greater than the pain of doing it. So we spend our time in stillness in whatever form of meditation we're using. And then we may notice the intention of moving and the motivation that happens when the pain of not doing something becomes greater than the pain of doing it. And that might even be the pain of the fact that maybe we haven't been meditating lately, but finally we're going to sort of push into doing it. So this is just sort of a general conversation about meditation, but I'd like to share something that was talked about in the retreat yesterday. Reverend Angela, her tradition is the Zen tradition. So she was offering 3 days of translation of Sing Sing Ning. And you've heard the first 4 lines of it many times. It's a longer treatise on freedom, on emptiness, and stepping into the stream. And it talks about ultimate truth that corresponds to a state of equanimity and absolute freedom, free from differentiation and conflict, right and wrong, loss and gain. We hear that in the 8 worldly winds. And these verses have been a favorite object of memorization and recitation by countless of monks over the ages. And with the development of Chan over the centuries, they've been embedded in the life of Chan monasteries. And the first verse, I've got a couple translations, but the first verse, the great way is not difficult. And in this translation, it's a simple translation. The great way is not difficult, just don't pick and choose. If you cut off all likes or dislikes, everything is clear like space. Here's another translation of the same verse. The perfect way knows no difficulties, except that it refuses to make preference. Only when freed from hate and love, it reveals itself fully, without disguise. Make the slightest distinction, and heaven and earth are set apart. If you wish to see the truth, don't think for or against. Likes and dislikes are the mind's disease. Without understanding the deep meaning, you cannot still your thoughts. It is clear, like space, nothing missing, nothing extra. If you want something, you cannot see things clouded. You must see them just as they are. Outside, don't get tangled in things. Inside, don't get lost in emptiness. Be still and become one, and all opposites disappear. So this is the invitation to step into the stream, not get tangled with the world and not get lost in spaciousness. It doesn't mean not to do the things you need to do, but you don't get entangled. And we don't get lost spacing in either. And if we be still and allow stillness to arise, questions that we can get entangled with, the only answer is to live and to step into the stream and allow the flow, to feel into the integrity of not doing that allows doing to simply be. If we hold on to opposites, we can't understand one, and if we don't allow the coming together of things, nothing happens. So stillness and motion, they return to each other. You might take a moment just to think if there's a time that you may have arrived at stillness. If you feel like it and you think about it now and you can see what your device and you want to drop it into the chat box, maybe later on I'll just popcorn read off. If there's a time that you feel you may have arrived at stillness, it could be in a life experience or in a meditative experience. Maybe when you're looking at a tree or a flower or sitting in your favorite spot. And another paragraph in that translation is, when it is denied, the world goes on. So whether we embrace it or deny it, the world goes on. And so we return to the root and understand. And so there's kind of a yearning that we have when we're in this practice of wanting to be liberated or have freedom from suffering. And we aren't separate from liberation. We belong to the great lineage of human experience, all those who have ever known liberation. That yearning that we have is a return to a remembrance of the inseparability of our original togetherness. And this arises because we remember that we are that. Not that we have to get there, but we can remember that we are that. We're part of a great lineage of human experience, of people who have known liberation. And we have that possibility too, through our meditation practice. And we can enter liberation not because we've never been there, but because we remember and we want to return. I mean, usually we're busy saying, what do I need to do? How do I get into the club? How do I fabricate myself to get what I want to come to me? But in this reading, it says, chase appearances and we lose the source. So we go beyond words and thoughts and we return to the stillness. One clear moment of waking up, seeing clearly, illuminates the freedom of letting go that's right there before us at every moment. Watching our attachments drop away naturally. We're putting our foot in the stream. Every time we sit, every time we're aware of waking up. And so in our meditation practice, we're taught to watch a simple object of the breath, or a touch point, or the pressure of the earth against our feet as we walk in our daily life. And this helps develop concentration and can help us relax the body and calm the mind. In order to more fully investigate what it is that causes our discontent and dis-ease, our suffering, and it allows us the opportunity to step into the stream, see for ourselves the freedom in letting go, in relaxing and in being still. There's many ways to practice. Some of us like learning to practice through the heavenly abodes, the 4 divine emotions of loving kindness and compassion, sympathetic joy and equanimity. And as householders and lay folks, we can regularly engage in the reflections of the 7 factors of enlightenment in our meditation, or understand the 5 faculties: faith and confidence, energy, persistent effort, mindfulness and concentration, and wisdom, discernment. They're skills that we already have to some degree, and we develop them regularly and cultivate them as part of our meditation practice, and it can help us develop our meditation and manage our life experience to benefit ourselves and others. And this can be very freeing and liberating to the heart and the mind. And also in our meditation practice, we can think about the paramis that I've talked about before, the 10 paramis, or it's also a way of letting go practices, generosity, letting go of tangible things, and as a way to let go of the tension caused by grasping at it. There's integrity. So it's interesting to see that generosity and integrity, Dana and Sila, are the first 2 of the 10 paramis. So not only in the 3 pillars of Dana, Sila, and Bhavana, they're here again in another list, but a list that we can pay attention to, daily, or we can sort of run through in our practice. Generosity, we can incline the mind toward this skillful thinking in our meditation practice. Generosity, virtue, letting go of prejudices and views and opinions, that's renunciation. Wisdom, letting go of the delusion and the ignorance, sort of that I'd rather not know. We can activate our wisdom quality. We use energy and patience, truthfulness and resolve and equanimity. And so there are many different ways of engaging bhavana, our meditation practice. So now I'm going to move along to Sila. Sila is about living an ethical life, harmonious living. Ethical conduct, or Sila, is built on the vast concept of universal love and compassion for ourselves and for all beings. And it's what the Buddha's teachings are based on. He gave the teachings on Sila for the good of the many and for the happiness of the many out of compassion for the world. And among these first teachings that the Buddha offered, they provide a foundation for the entirety of the Buddhist training. They were guidelines for ethical living, and those are the 5 precepts. The Buddha knew and understood that applying them to our thoughts, to our words, to our actions, every day, it can be living precepts, no matter how challenging they might be. It's a way to improve our lives by helping to resolve a lot of emotional struggle and stress that cloud the mind. The precepts are they're integral to the Buddha's path of practice. And the path of practice is the Noble Eightfold Path. And that guides the practice of virtue alongside the development of mental discipline and wisdom. So the precepts are usually recited as we did in the beginning, refraining from taking a life, refraining from taking what isn't freely given, refraining from illicit sexual conduct, to refrain from unskillful speech, gossiping and speaking harshly, and abstain from taking intoxicants that cause the mind to be heedless, cause heedlessness. So there's a lot that can be said about each of the individual precepts and how living with them helps cut away the complications and entanglements and the resulting suffering that we make up for ourselves. Even people who don't feel ready to meditate or take on any other aspect of the Buddhist practice, they can begin with the precepts and see positive change in circumstances and states of mind right away. Some teachers recommend starting with a single precept, like a pledge to refrain from lying, speaking poorly, a practice that, just try it for a period of time. Achan Fang Shutiko once said, "If you can't control your mouth, how can you ever learn to control your mind?" For most of us, that's a significantly challenging place to begin, I have to say. So in ethical conduct, Sila, which is based on love and compassion, really, for ourselves and for all of the beings within our community, it's interesting to note that the three factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, right speech, right action, and right livelihood, are all included in the Sila category. And I think that Robert might be addressing those right now in the Wednesday night class in what the Buddha taught. So restraint facilitates peace and concentration of mind. I know that word restraint is sometimes hard to embrace, but it facilitates peace and concentration of mind. And it can be represented in this ancient verse proclaimed by the Buddha in the collection called the Dhammapada. Some of you have studied it before. Not to commit evil, but to practice all good, and to keep the heart pure. This is the teaching of the Buddha. Not to commit evil, but to practice all good, and to keep the heart pure. This is the teaching of the Buddha. To keep the heart pure means to try to keep the mind uncluttered. It doesn't mean that we're saintly. It means that we're reasonably aware, reasonably caring, open to ourselves and others, and not influenced by hatred, greed, and delusion. So to kind of wrap up this section on Sila, I'm going to give you this quote from Achan Mun. He expounds, this is from out of a book talking about Mei Chi Kwan, who was a lay person who became enlightened. But Achan Mun expounds the virtues of moral conduct in a book that was written about Mei Chi. And he explained that the moral virtue gained by faithfully observing the 5 moral precepts is the foundation for being a decent human being. Each of the 5 precepts carries a particular benefit. By refraining from harming living creatures, we can expect to enjoy good health and longevity. By refraining from stealing, our wealth and property will be safe from theft and misfortune. By refraining from adultery, partners will be faithful toward each other and live contentedly without feeling guilt or shame. By refraining from lying, we will always be trusted and respected by our integrity, for our integrity. By refraining from intoxicants, we will guard our intelligence and remain bright, knowledgeable people who are not easily misguided or thrown into confusion. People who maintain a high level of moral virtue tend to reassure living beings everywhere by conveying a sense of contentment and mutual trust, and by promoting this feeling in others. The supportive and protective power of this harmonious living is a solid foundation for being reborn into higher realms of existence. So the last on this list, which is really of primary importance, is dana, generosity. The Buddha understood giving to be a powerful source of merit and long-term benefits both in this life and in lives to come, which he saw in his time of enlightenment. While the teachings on merit don't carry a lot of meaning for very many Western Dharma practitioners, these teachings suggest unseen pathways that consequences of our actions return to us. And so the Buddha emphasized the joy of giving. And dana isn't meant to be obligatory or done reluctantly. It should be performed when the giver is delighted before, during, and after giving. At its most basic level, dana is in the Buddhist tradition means giving freely without expecting anything in return. The act of giving is purely out of compassion or goodwill or the desire for someone else's well-being. Perhaps dana is more about how we are than what we do. And through generosity, we cultivate a generous spirit. And generosity of spirit will usually lead to generosity of action. But being a generous person is more important than any particular act of giving. I mean, it is, after all, possible to give without it being a generous act. Although giving for the purposes of helping others is an important part of the meditation, of the motivation and joy of giving, the Buddha considered giving for the purpose of attaining freedom as the highest motivation. So for this purpose, one gives gifts to adorn and beautify the mind. Giving to oneself. Among these adornments and beautifying the mind are non-clinging, loving kindness, concerns for the well-being of others. And there can be two ways of understanding generosity. One is a spontaneous and natural expression of an open mind and an open heart, when we're connected wholeheartedly with others and the world. And it's not a matter of deciding to give. It's giving simply, it flows out of us. And this type of generosity, sometimes it's like the generosity of a mother with her children. And the second way of understanding generosity is as a practice itself, which we can begin even though it may not automatically be flowing out of us. Sometimes we don't feel very generous. But it helps connect us with others and with ourselves. And giving creates a relationship between the giver and the receiver. So acts of generosity help us to learn more about the nature of our relationships, and it helps us develop these relationships. Practicing generosity together with a meditation practice helps ensure that our spiritual practice doesn't make us seem aloof from others, because we have that generosity arising. And through the practice of generosity, we can begin to understand also where we're closed and where we might be holding back or where we feel our fear. We learn what keeps us from being generous. We take on the practice to see where we resist it. So the Buddha taught to begin first with generosity and morality. The mutuality that they constellate begins to erode the personality, our feeling of self, the personality shell. Morality means mutual respect. And with this mutuality, we are enriched and we realize the beauty of the heart. And then when we see how lost and distracted people are when they get into the sense realm and they're unrestrained and they can't control sexuality or intoxication, and you see the hazards, sometimes things just, we renounce them naturally. They just fall away. It's not like about puritanical handcuffs that, I can do this. But it's up to each of us to assess what our standard is. And that was explained by Ajahn Sucitto. So I know I've gone on a long time and I want to hear what each of you has to say if you feel like sharing, but I will conclude by saying that as we study the Buddha's teachings and we put those teachings into practice, our lives change. Practicing Dhamma principles, the 3 pillars of the Dhamma, generosity, the 5 precepts, Sila, following the Eightfold Noble Path, bhavana, brings greater happiness and security into our lives. And we develop the ability to face life's challenges with more skill and patience and endurance. And so I like what Walt Whitman says. Do not be discouraged. Keep on. There are divine things well enveloped. I swear to you, he says, there are divine things more beautiful than words can tell. So thank you for your kind attention and for listening to the Dhamma and for applying your mind to contemplate this teaching. It might have been hard to stick with, so I appreciate it very much. And may the benefits of our practice, listening and practicing the Dhamma, may those merits benefit all sentient beings. So take a deep breath. Let all those words settle down. I'm going to say goodbye to this Facebook thing.